one of the things that I wonder about that myself is that Don Heron wrote an important essay some years ago where he talked about Howard's fiction as reflecting film noir. And it's an important essay, as I said, and really hits the nail on the head in many regards, particularly in reference to the times in which the Howard fiction was written. For myself, I accept his premise, but I still see sword and sorcery per se as being boots on the ground Western material, as reflecting the frontier more than anything. And I wonder if was sword and sorcery killed, or was it just neglected, or what happened to it? That sword and sorcery boom that we had in the 70s, maybe it was reflective of its time, but that sort of fiction, we had a boom back in the 50s in Westerns, and no one feels that way about Westerns anymore. So are these stories more or less just a reflection of their time, where there is a small audience? That audience has to be built perhaps in some way. Did it say all it had to say in the 1970s? If we wanted to create a resurgence in sword and sorcery, how would we go about doing that? It seems as if it's so specific that it almost works against itself in its success. I mean, is it kind of a dead-end genre? I seriously wonder about this, because I'm writing it again, and I'd like to be published again, but I'm writing specifically sword and sorcery, and it's bleak, and it's weird, and it's dark, and there's a psychological aspect to it. There's so much emphasis and interest now in dark fantasy these days. Why is not sword and sorcery part of that? Is it because it's not a juvenile kind of fiction? I know that dark fantasy has an awful lot of appreciation and adherence among young people, you know, because it's very romantic in this kind of Victorian way. Is there some aspect of sword and sorcery that is in there but isn't appealing to them? Do you have any thoughts on any of this?
Well, and the other component that we have to be sensitive to here, and maybe this is where I'm coming from, is the voice of the publisher, is the commercial viability. And in particular, in today's publishing environment, where the dynamics are much, much different than they were 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, you're right.
Particularly in the way that you can publish online, the way that mass market paperbacks are marketed these days, the way hardback is practically going away. So what will the public buy? And at the moment, at least, from what I see, an awful lot of the fiction that's out there is very much the, what term I want to apply to this, the world building chronology, almost reference style.
There it is,
that I suppose a certain amount of that is an outgrowth from Tolkien, with a huge volume of words that have been published, probably millions of words now, on just describing Middle-earth and the ages that surrounded it, that have really nothing to do with that whole aspect of drama and dialogue and interchange among people. You can sit down and, I suppose, write a sword and sorcery reference book of sorts, a description of a world, who's hammering out the weaponry, who's the guild leader for the magic users and whatnot. But is that satisfying you as authors for creating the type of sword and sorcery tale that you want to give out to the reader? And conversely, what's going to sell when the publisher takes it on? I'm not sure that I have an answer for that, but I'm sure that that's why a lot of writers or potential writers run up against brick walls with, particularly in the form of the short story, but even to the degree of a novel, that I have this tale that I've created, and I have this story that I think people will be interested in reading, and yet finding someone who's willing to enable it from a commercial standpoint to the reader. So you see the other types of media rising, where self-publishing, publishing online without even a physical product and so forth, being perhaps more the way that goes. Back to the point of sword and sorcery as a genre, is it commercially viable these days? I suspect the answer is probably a qualified no, in that it's not happening, and generally anything that can happen will happen that makes someone a buck. But Is that a function of something else changed the formula, you know, the growth of the internet, the advent of role playing, or whatever it might be, or is it a reflection of society and so forth? And you go back to, particularly in the 50s, we'll say, the way Westerns were published, the way adventure fiction was published, with the slew of men's magazines, almost pulp magazines, the Argosies, and so forth of the time, where the outlet for that was and where the market was, and it's, I think, probably gone away to a degree because societal mores and points of view have changed.
The whole culture really has changed.
And a lot of those magazines folded just because the commercial support wasn't there for it.
I was going to say, if we see sword and sorcery as being about blockhead males, you know, who just hit a woman over the head with a club or something like that, I mean, that has some kind of appeal, I suppose. But it's, you know, beyond that immediate visceral thing, it's not doing anybody any good. Maybe it is a reflection of the times then that you know, because now we're past the culture wars and we're past first, second waves of feminism, and it has had an effect on society, and by and large a very good effect. But if this sort of fiction is just seen as growing He-Man stuff, that is one-dimensional and has nothing more to recommend it than that, as I said before somewhere, I mean, then it probably deserves not, you know, to have too much commercial success. On the other hand, the question doesn't go away. There are a lot of people out there who really like sword and sorcery. And for instance, I went to a little writers group at the Palatine Library here a few weeks ago. And a woman who writes detective stories, she lives in Chicago and writes detective stories, was talking about how to write in self-fiction and specifically how you plot a detective story and how you set it in Chicago and so on. And I'm sitting next to this woman next to me, and she's somewhere in her late 20s or early 30s, and we start talking a little bit, you know, during the break, you know, having a cup of coffee. Turns out she's a big Robert E. Howard fan. Well, there were more women, more Robert E. Howard fans out there than you would think. So he or his fiction, there's some kind of visceral appeal there that does cross the gender barrier and so on and so forth. And this tells me that there's a right barrier there in which to explore sword and sorcery fiction. And if we're trying to do that, then we're trying to keep up our end of the bargain. We need to find a viable mechanism for someone to produce this stuff commercially so that they can recoup their investment. That's what it comes down to. Exactly. So we need to find some way of generating audience, getting a response, producing good fiction. I would say the strongest element of that is to produce really good fiction. But you produce good fiction, I produce good fiction. Charles Saunders, Lord knows, produces good fiction. I'm going to hold this up again because he's writing the best stuff going these days. And here are the first two Amaro books, and they didn't sell sufficiently well for the publisher to go ahead and publish the last three in a commercial venue. There's no excuse for that in America, in a modern world where we have a large literate, you know, population. Maybe it was a matter of not getting the word out. That could be the case, but this is the kind of writer who needs to be championed. God knows we all admire Howard and so on, but Howard has become a little industry in and of himself. And if we're going to treat sword and sorcery seriously, not just Howard's fiction, but sword and sorcery seriously, not just Fritz Leiber or anyone, we have to do something to make the genre appeal as strongly as Westerns do to its audience, and film noir and noir novels do to their audience. The audience is there. We have to find a way to meet each other halfway so that we can write the stuff that readers appreciate, and everyone stays in business and someone makes a little bit of a profit.
Yeah, you just sparked a couple of things, but before I say that, I just want to say, Charles Saunders bought, years ago, late 70s, early 80s, he bought 3 or 4 short stories for the magazine he was doing. But like a lot of fanzines in those days, before your story gets published, they fold. And I had, not only that happened with Charles's, there were a couple other magazines I had sold to that they had 1 or 2 issues come out, and then they folded because they're just done through the mail. There's not a lot of money in it. And, you know, you sell your story and you're going to get paid when they publish it. And then they send you the story back, sorry, for one reason or another, we can no longer continue.